Hey everybody, Gromos here, and this time I have some Warthunder tank gameplay. As you most likely know, the NDA for the closed beta has been partially lifted, and I can bring you a bit of footage from the beta, so I thought I'd show you a few gameplay clips if you don't have access, and talk a bit about a few things from the game and also from the developer diaries. So far I have driven the T-34, the PzKpfw IV F2, the KV-1 and the T-26 reserve tank. I have to say, the game looks very good, and I can't wait to get more tanks to play with. So far my impression is very positive. It looks great of course, and you can even shoot parts of tanks, like the storage box on the back of the PzKpfw's turret. But keep in mind, this is still closed beta and early in development. All the gameplay you see is still work in progress and subject to change. The footage is of course from the arcade mode. Realistic and simulated battles will be added later. Now, what I want to take a closer look at during this video is the damage model and also the different shell types. From what we know so far from the beta and the dev diary, I think here we have a few very interesting differences to hitpoint based games. I think the detailed damage model brings knowing a tank's weak point to a higher level, at least in arcade mode. In simulator mode I think you will be more focused on zeroing your gun, getting the correct range and hitting the target at all. But for now, let's focus on arcade mode, and here I think knowing the weak points of a tank will be quite important. And this I think will be more complex than just knowing where the weakest armor is. Warthunder of course does not use a hit point system, so a tank is knocked out when for example your crew is hit, or enough crew members are out of action, or if critical modules are destroyed, or a mixture of those things. With the hit point system in comparison, like in World of Tanks, you can also damage or destroy modules, but as long as you don't hit the ammo rack, this won't destroy the tank. The tank will still be alive if it has at least one hit point left, no matter how many crew members or modules are knocked out. If you penetrate the armor with a hit point system, you do your gun's average damage, and when your target's HP get to 0, it blows up. So it won't matter that much where you penetrate the armor, as long as you do. With Warthunder's system this is different. Penetrating the armor is one thing, but if you want to knock out the tank, you have to hit something important after you penetrated the armor too. So, on top of knowledge of armor weak points, it will help you to know the location of crew members and important equipment within the tank and what you might hit from the angle you are shooting. Depending on the angle you shoot from, aiming for some very typical weak spots might not be a very good idea, though I think we have to play the game a bit longer to be really sure. But take the lower glacis plate of the tank's hull for example, a very typical armor weak point on many tanks. However, let's assume you face an enemy tank at short range head on. Unless he is sitting on a hill above you, you will have to aim slightly down to hit the lower glacis plate. Now if you do hit and penetrate, your shot will be angled downwards after penetrating. And in that case the shell might not go very far within the tank before hitting the bottom of the tank. Maybe it will hit the transmission if it is in the front, maybe it will injure the driver, but damage that destroys the tank is unlikely from that angle, and one can assume he will be at least able to fire back at you. And there is also a chance that the shot just leaves the targets through the weak bottom armor only a few centimeters after penetrating the lower glacis, without doing much at all. If you hit the upper glacis you might have a harder time penetrating, but if you do, your shot goes into the middle of the tank at a flatter angle, improving your chances to do major damage. So I think some knowledge of the tank's internal layout will help you a lot here, and I think the typical commander's cupola sniping will not be very effective in Warthunder. Another difference between Warthunder's tanks and games with a hit point system is that even a smaller, lower tier tank can take out a larger one relatively fast if he manages to penetrate the armor and hit something important. With a hit point system, even if you manage to penetrate a higher tier vehicle, you still have to overcome a large hit point difference. I think because of this, if you manage to get in the flank of a higher tier tank in a lower tier one, your chances are better in Warthunder. You have countered the potential armor advantage of your opponent by getting a shot at the opponent's weaker side armor, and you don't have to overcome a hit point difference. But we will see how this plays out when we get more tanks to play with in the future. Now, another thing you might need some knowledge about in the future is the type of armor plating. Currently, all the armor plates are made from the same kind of RHA steel as far as I can tell, but according to the dev diary about the damage model, later there will be differences in quality of the armor, and if it is rolled or cast steel for example. The shell type matters of course too. The principal shell types I have spotted so far are armor piercing, high explosive anti-tank and fragmentation. I don't have enough experience yet to say much about the effectiveness and uses of high explosive and fragmentation rounds. Both HE and fragmentation are of course rounds used usually versus soft targets. You can of course fire high explosive at a tank you can't penetrate and hope to do some damage that way, but unless you fire a very high caliber, you will most likely not do much. I hope in the future we might get more AI soft targets like hidden anti-tank guns to use the fragmentation and HE rounds against. Of course, there are also a few open-top vehicles in the release tree like the Su-76, and in-game we have the Flakpanzer I, where the crew is also exposed. I think the fragmentation shells would work great against those vehicles with an exposed crew, since you don't have to hit the vehicle itself to knock out the crew. At the moment you can't see the crew on the Flakpanzer I, but Gaijin already said in the last livestream that those crews will be added and can be targeted. They will also be good targets for the tank's machine guns, which will also be added later, both coaxial as well as anti-aircraft ones on the commander's hatch if the tank had one. Now back to the shells. We had shrapnel and high explosive. Another shell type you can get on some tanks is high explosive anti-tank or heat. Now heat rounds back then were not that effective compared to high velocity kinetic energy armor piercing rounds, especially not when fired from high velocity guns, because the fuses had trouble setting the warhead off fast enough, and a heat round loses power when it detonates at the wrong distance from the armor it is supposed to penetrate. The reason for this, in case you wonder, is that the heat round uses a shaped explosive charge to focus the explosive energy towards the target and into a conical metal liner at the front of the shaped charge. This metal liner is then inverted by the exploding shaped charge and turned into basically a fast extending metal spike, which puts so much pressure on the armor that it can penetrate it. If the warhead is too close to the armor plate when it explodes, this spike does not have enough space to properly form and the round's effectiveness is reduced. I don't think this effect is simulated in Warthunder, at least not yet, though it might be in the future. Anyway, the heat rounds that are available for the high velocity guns of the Panzer IV F and Stux 3F have a smaller penetration than the standard AP rounds, at least at shorter range. However, since the distance does not impact the armor penetration of the heat round, it is better for longer range shots, as it won't lose any penetration at long range. So it is a trade-off between armor piercing and heat. One is better at short range, the other is better at higher range. On a tank with a lower muzzle velocity, like the Panzer IV-C with its short 75mm cannon, the heat round has of course a better penetration at all ranges. Now on to the armor piercing rounds. There are of course a lot of different AP and APCR rounds currently in the game. I don't know if there is a difference yet in the characteristics of those shells other than the penetration of course, but according to the developer diary about the damage model there will be differences eventually, not just between AP and APCR, but also between the different AP rounds, different caps for example. A normal AP round is just a solid round made out of a very hard metal alloy. However, they are also a little bit brittle, and the faster the muzzle velocity got, they had a tendency to shatter before penetrating the armor, especially when fired at angled armor. To get around that, the AP rounds got a cap made out of a softer metal, which reduced the chance of shattering. Such rounds are called armor piercing capped, or APC. But in order to get the best shape to penetrate armor without shattering, those rounds had a very blunt nose. A spiky tip would shatter too easy. However, a spiky tip is more aerodynamic, so many armor-piercing rounds often got another extra cap to make them more aerodynamic, a so-called ballistic cap. According to the dev diary, those different shell types will eventually be simulated, So then you have to keep in mind that a round without a cap might shatter earlier when fired on angled armor than one with a cap, even if they in theory have the same armor penetration otherwise. APCR rounds don't need a cap, since the penetrator is encased within a soft metal shell, which has a good aerodynamic shape, and since it is a soft metal, does the same job than the soft metal cap on a normal APC round. Well, that was some tank footage and a few thoughts on the damage model and weapons. And this is it for this video. I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.